Back in episode 4 I told you about some real life experiences I've had with the paranormal. I also mentioned that as a kid growing up I spent a lot of time at my Nanna's pub and that place was seriously haunted. I never saw anything there myself, but my family did. These are their stories. Are you ready for more spookiness? Let's get weird.
The history of mankind is riddled with the weird and the wonderful. Bizarre people, strange places, and odd events. For centuries, we've told each other fantastic stories around campfires and in darkened rooms. Tales of ghosts, UFOs, and conspiracies. But are these stories exactly that? Stories? There's only one way to find out. Dive into the rabbit hole and enter Marc W. Shako's Weird World.
Hello and welcome to Marc W. Shako's Weird World. And today we have more true ghost stories for you. These all based around my family's experiences at my Nanna's pub. My Nanna's pub was originally called the Royal Oak. She lived there with her second husband, who naturally as a kid I called Uncle, and my actual uncle. Every weekend my parents travelled to the pub to work. Every second weekend I went with them. The Royal Oak once stood in the countryside of South Yorkshire. Built in the 1700s, it was a classic Georgian design located 100 yards from the main road on a long, wide gravel driveway that doubled as a car park. The roads that led to the grand old place snaked through the surrounding fields, and if I pestered long enough, my dad would park the car en route to the pub on moonless nights on one particularly dark road we nicknamed Spooky Lane. When he did turn the lights off, that complete and inky darkness was something I'll remember for a long time. It's also perfect to remember as we dive into these true ghost stories. Are you ready? Let's get weird. At the time of this first story I'm about to tell you, Dad was living at the pub. This took place before I was born, but I can still recall the bedroom now. That's because it was the one I slept in whenever I stayed over as a kid. The bedroom was almost a perfect square, bar one recess for a built-in wardrobe. That simple design meant one thing: no shadowy corners for the bogeyman to hide in a building that old where spooky events were a regular occurrence. That can be important to a kid. Because of the remote location, security was paramount, so the old building had sliding chain locks on all the windows, even those on the first floor. That's upstairs if you're listening in America. So those windows were accessible only by ladder. While the windows locked, the internal doors did not. Anyone who has worked in the industry will tell you the best part of the working day is when the shift is finished, the punters have all gone home and the lights are out. It's not because the work is done that this is the highlight. Because of the high energy after a busy shift, going to bed straight after is impossible. So as the dust settles on the aftermath, it's the turn of the staff to have a drink and share stories about the shift, telling tall tales about strange customers or funny events. On the right night, a few extra drinks can flow and the banter flies. It's the closest you'll get to a campfire without having a campfire. It was on one of these nights, after saying goodnight to his colleagues, Dad trudged upstairs to bed. All was quiet except for the sound of laughter drifting upstairs from those he'd left behind. The hour was late and he was looking forward to a good night's sleep. But there was a problem. When he reached the bedroom, the door wouldn't open. He tried the handle, and it moved, but the door did not. It didn't rattle, it didn't budge. He knew the doors didn't lock, yet it was stuck fast. So he turned around and tramped back downstairs. Dad stumbled back into the kitchen, thinking he might have been the victim of some elaborate prank, but when he relayed his story, the first instinct from those downstairs was to scoff. They had no idea what he was talking about. In fact, they thought he was playing a trick on them. So, Dad dragged my uncles upstairs to see for themselves. They playfully ribbed Dad on the journey upstairs, a grown man who couldn't open a door. Then they tried the handle for themselves. It was true. The door wouldn't budge. It felt like something on the other side was blocking it, and after a quick assessment of the situation, it was decided that the best answer was brute force. After working together shouldering the door, they managed to open it a crack. Peering through the small gap they'd made, it soon became obvious why the door refused to open. All the furniture inside the room had been pushed against the far side of the door. After more work fighting against the bed on the carpet, they opened the door wide enough for Dad to squeeze through. A quick inspection revealed that there was nobody in the room, and all the chain locks were in place on the windows. Going to sleep that night would take some time. I did tell this story once to a good friend, a good, sceptical friend. He suggested that this bizarre event could have been the result of an earthquake. For those of you listening outside the UK, earthquakes in England are extremely rare, especially ones powerful enough to move furniture. Is it possible there could have been a tremor strong enough to move furniture that nobody remembers? A tremor that only affected furniture in one room, and not smaller, lighter objects in the rest of the pub? An earthquake strong enough to shift heavy furniture on a carpet would surely have been noticed. If not at the time, then there would have been plenty of evidence after the fact. I've told this story to many people and am yet to hear a rational explanation more plausible than the story itself. As mentioned in the first tale, the Royal Oak's remote location added to its character and atmosphere. Is it also possible that it influenced the types of ghosts that walk the halls there? One ghost regularly seen stalking the rooms at the Royal Oak was that of a large imposing figure wearing a three-cornered hat. This character also had a wooden leg much like a pirate, though anyone who saw him would tell you that they were sure they were not looking at a pirate, but a highwayman. The highwayman was given a nickname, Pegleg. Whenever Pegleg was around, the atmosphere changed to one of foreboding. Of course, not everyone saw Pegleg. There were some people who were naturally sceptical of his existence. For some, only seeing is believing. This next story concerns one such individual. The pub itself was a big old place, and on weekends it doubled as a nightclub. Despite the isolated location, at weekends the place would be packed. Because of that, the pub required a large cleaning staff. A cleaning staff who, when not working hard to get the place ready for the next round of visitors, told tall tales of ghosts and hauntings to newer, less experienced colleagues. The kitchen served as their break room, and one break in particular started out like most others. On this break, the expected tea and chatter were present, but one of the cleaners was not. They shouted to find her, and she swiftly replied. She was in the next room, cleaning a brass-topped table which sat at the foot of the stairs. The rest of the cleaners continued their break when the missing cleaner shouted that she would be in to join them as soon as the table was polished. It would normally only take a few minutes. She entered the kitchen even sooner than any of them expected. "What's wrong with you? You look awful." She stood before them, her face pale, hands trembling. "I'm not going back in there," she said. She was met with a stunned silence until one of the new, uninitiated cleaners finally asked, "Why not?" Visibly shaken, she said, "He's in there. Pegleg." One voice laughed in the silence. It was the new cleaner. When she realised she was laughing alone, she stopped. "You've got to be joking," she said. "Come with me," Mum replied. My mum had been there for a while at this point and knew what to expect, so she led the sceptical cleaner through to the stairs. They stood side by side at the foot of the stairs looking up. "See?" the new cleaner said, after a minute. "Nothing," but Mum knew better. "Listen." After a few seconds there came a sound. A heavy, plodding footfall on the stairs. One normal foot, the other the clump of a wooden leg. The new cleaner's face drained of colour, and it was her turn to tremble. She never made fun of Pegleg again. So, what about the highwaymen? One of the more popular theories about ghosts is that they are stuck between our physical world and the afterlife, usually because of some unexpected, shocking or violent end. The theory being these poor souls wander around as spirits, unaware of their physical demise. If his appearance was anything to go by, could it have been that this ghost was once a highwayman? That's a dangerous life for anyone. Could it be he was stuck between this life and the next? And if you visited the site where the pub once stood, could it be that he's there still? Or has he moved on, looking for somewhere new? Now you have a little background into the kinds of activity at the Royal Oak, residual haunting and poltergeist. With this next tale, you get 2 for the price of 1. 2 short but intriguing tales for you, building on the theme of poltergeists. So the bar in the place itself was brass topped, just like the highwayman's table, and it was wide as was the area behind it. The extra room was important during those packed out weekends, so the bar staff could easily pass one another. All in all, the distance from the back of the bar to the front of the bar was around 5 or 6 feet. Behind the bar were shelves full of glasses for easy access. Late one afternoon, Mum and Dad were working and a couple came in. The couple were impressed with the age of the old place and actually asked about hauntings. So Dad mentioned the odd sighting, poltergeist activity. No sooner were the words out of his mouth, a glass flew from the shelf behind the bar, completely cleared the bar before smashing on the floor on the customer's side. The couple finished their drinks and quickly left. The second one happened one night again after the pub had closed. Dad had stayed up for one of those late night after hours sessions and had fallen asleep afterwards. He woke up alone, disturbed by a distinctive hollow metallic sound, the sound of kegs being moved around in the cellar. By the time he opened his blurry eyes, the noise had already stopped. Before the notion registered that he could have dreamt about the noise, he saw somebody helping themselves to a shot from the optics mounted behind the bar. Then his eyes came into focus, and when they did, there was nobody there. Thinking he'd imagined the whole thing, he decided it was time for bed. The next morning he'd completely forgotten about the weird stuff from the night before, and he went downstairs and spoke to my Nanna. "What were you doing last night?" she asked. He explained that he wasn't doing anything, he'd just fallen asleep. Why? Asleep? The racket coming from downstairs. Dad was confused, but memories from the night previous then crept back into his mind, and then he wished he hadn't asked. My Nanna said, "I thought you were messing about in the cellar, moving empty barrels around." The word poltergeist comes from the German meaning noisy ghost. Poltergeist activity includes objects being moved around or in some cases thrown, loud noises like knocking and banging. This kind of spirit is also purportedly capable of biting and scratching those unfortunate enough to experience it. Poltergeist activity often occurs in the presence of an adolescent, in a home where there is at least one teenager, one theory being that poltergeists feed off their energy, though this gives rise to claims of bored kids with nothing better to do than playing pranks on adults. Other theories claim poltergeists can be written off simply as the result of a vivid imagination or memory lapses, but in the case of the glass story above, that would be an elaborate prank indeed. To get a glass to perform the kind of gymnastics mentioned, not only that, but the prank would have to be set up during a working shift and not triggered beforehand. Who would have time for that? And Mum and Dad were victims of the prank as much as anyone, so it might be easy to suggest this was a result of an overactive imaginations, heightened by the mood of telling spooky stories, but it does nothing to account for the broken glass. And Dad's experience would be very easy to write off as imagination if my Nanna hadn't heard the same thing from another point of view.
For more spooky strangeness, visit www.markwshako.com. And now, back to the episode.
Here's one last story for you. The bar at the Royal Oak ran almost the full length of the far wall of the large open space. Behind the bar were 2 doors. The first led to the kitchen. The other was a dark old wooden door which led to the beer cellar. Inside the cellar door were a couple of stone steps leading into a square room with only one other entrance. Double doors to the left where beer deliveries were received. The remote location and need for security meant the only time these doors were unlocked was to receive a delivery. The cellar was also home to expensive bottles of spirits, so not locking those doors would be a quick way to lose a lot of money. One of the first things you'd notice on entering the cellar, besides the large barrels and chilled air, were electrical sockets. One by each beer barrel arranged in an L shape in the corner. You see, to help thirsty customers get their hands on ice-cold beer ASAP, the bar was fitted with electric beer pumps. Place a glass under the tap, flick a switch, half a pint is poured. Flick it again, hey presto, a pint. Ideal when the round was a mixture of beers and spirits. Leave the glass under the tap, mix a double Jack and Coke, or whatever other drinks are available. Not here though, this is a podcast. Anyway, let's get to the story of the haunted cellar. Because it was so busy, it was common to see several of these electronic beer taps going at once. In the middle of the chaos of a Friday night shift, the place is packed, disco music is pumping, the dance floor jumping, and of course, beer is flowing. That's when the night takes a turn for the weird. The beer has stopped pouring. Every tap at once. The music's still playing, the dance floor is still jumping, but all of the pumps have stopped at exactly the same time. So it's obviously not a power cut because the music is still playing, all the lights are still on, maybe a fuse has gone. So the bar staff flick the switches up and down, nothing. The problem must be in the cellar. Upon entering the cellar, everything seemed normal. There is nobody messing about in there. All of the kegs are aligned in their usual L shape along the walls, no expensive bottles of spirits missing, and those all-important double doors still locked from the inside. And then they see it. Every plug to those electric beer pumps, spaced evenly over the distance of a few yards, has not only been switched off, but completely pulled from the wall. At the same time. Unplugged. Every single one. After a few moments nonplussed, the plugs are reinstated to their working positions and normal service resumes. A problem easily solved. But for anyone working that night, a situation not so easily forgotten. There you have it, folks, some more true ghost stories. Do you think earthquakes or pranks or imagination was to blame for one of these stories? All of them? Let me know in the comments. The only thing I ever experienced myself was the plod of footsteps upstairs while me and Mum were alone in the place. We were both downstairs. Of course, in true horror movie fashion, I went up to investigate, alone. I didn't see anything. I also never felt anything there, so nothing like my experience in the flat from episode 4. Although that's not to say things like that didn't happen. One day Mum and Dad were in there when the atmosphere turned. If you've never experienced that, lucky you. Anyway, they decided to clear out for a while. Just as they were leaving, my uncle returned from an errand. Dad quickly turned to Mum and said, "Don't say anything," before turning to my uncle, "We're just going for a paper." So they drove off, got a paper and came back. When they did, they found my uncle sitting outside on a bench. "What are you doing out here?" Dad asked, all innocent. "I'm not going in there," my uncle replied. "There's something in there." That's all from me. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep it weird. The intro music is Slasher by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio, check out his YouTube channel. The outro music is Lone Wolf by Guillaume Bernard. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review and share this episode wherever you may have heard it. And you can find me on Facebook and X as Marc W. Shako. For more information on my books and all things podcasty, visit www.markwshako.com. Thanks for listening.